To Hour 3 of America's Forum. I'm Morgan Thompson.
And I'm J.D. Hayworth, and we've been covering a lot of things today. In fact, you've been on the move so much. I know you're not ready to retire, but you'll get a well-deserved rest following the program. But when it comes to the subject of retirement, a lot of factors go into where we want to settle down. So which states are the best for military retirees and which ones are not? Joining us now with some new data on that, Odysseas Papadimitriou, the CEO of WalletHub.com. Odysseas, it is good to have you back on America's Forum.
Oh, thank you for having me again.
So you guys, you know, back in the old days when Dick Clark was still with us, we had something called Rate a Record. But you guys at WalletHub.com come up with all these different best and worst of. They're putting up the best states for military retirees. Odysseas, you've got Wyoming at #1. Take us through the top 10 if you would, please, sir.
Sure. So we looked at 19 different metrics, and the metrics are around three main categories: economic environment, the quality of life, and healthcare at each of these states, including the District of Columbia. And our top 10 was Wyoming, New Hampshire, Montana, South Dakota, Nebraska, Alaska, Delaware, Kansas, Oklahoma, and number 10 is Maine.
Now, what were the 10 worst states for veterans?
So I'm going to start with the worst one and work my way up from there. So the dead last was California. Above that was New York, then Indiana, Arizona, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Oregon, Rhode Island, Arkansas. At the 10th from the bottom comes Arkansas.
Well, now, you know, I used to represent Arizona in the Congress of the United States, and Odysseas, I would go out in my district. I had Pearl Harbor survivors, quite a number of them, and it seemed that any number of military retirees, given the installations in Arizona and the weather, the military retirees hung around. But you've got the state I represented in the same order where it came into the Union, number 48. What are you picking on Arizona for?
So Arizona, I'm looking at the detailed metrics right now, but some of its weaknesses is the number of hospitals that it has on a per capita basis. It's 47th in the country. The number of VA health facilities for the number of veterans that they have is number 31 in the country. And veteran-owned businesses is number 39 in the country. And it taxes military pension, not to the full extent, but it still taxes military pension, whereas there are a lot of other states that do not. And the state and local sales taxes are pretty high as well, at number 43 in the country.
So you mentioned healthcare as one of the major factors. How does the new VA scandal factor into all of this?
I'm sorry, which? The veterans.
Yes.
That's a great question. Our data was not able to account for that.
Okay.
I think the key thing for us, like for example, but you're bringing up a good point about the VA health facilities. So for example, Virginia has more veterans than any other state on a per capita basis, and yet has the fewest VA health facilities for the number of veterans that it has. It needs to have like maybe 10 times more than it has to catch up to Wyoming in order to have the same density. So the key takeaway for us is that a lot of people do not realize how young military retirees are. They're in their early 40s. And so there is a lot of data, good data, that they can use to make a very informed decision about where to retire, and depending on whether they're looking to join the workforce, or whether they're going to go and get some education, or just want to relax for a few years after a few hard years serving our country.
You know, I have to say I was quite surprised to see California and New York amongst the worst, especially since quality of life is one of your top 3 factors. So why is this? Is this high taxes or lack of job opportunities?
So let's take a look specifically at California. One is that they both share is the high cost of living and the high housing costs in particular. California, for example, is 48th in the country in housing costs and 45th when it comes to the cost of living. But also veterans vote with their feet, and on a veterans per capita basis, it's only 50th in the country at California. and veteran-owned businesses and veteran job opportunities are also toward the bottom. So it seems like California doesn't do a great job in terms of providing an affordable way for veterans to live there, but also help them in terms of educating the employers about the strengths that these brave men and women are bringing to the table and how they can help the private workforce.
Odysseas, when you guys at WalletHub.com try to factor in all these different subjects, do you ever look back and I guess we'd call it what they call it in the military an after-action review? When you stop and evaluate, you said, you know, we used these data points, but might we have been better off using a couple of other variables to try and quantify the desirability factor? When you look at this study, are there a couple of other factors you wish you would have added to the mix in coming up with this rating?
No, because we do exactly what you said, and we look at all the available data. We constantly try to say, can we go deeper? You know, for example, one of the metrics we wish we had, but we couldn't get our hands on was number of jobs that require clearance. Military retirees, a lot of them come out of service with clearance, and so they're the perfect candidates for jobs that require clearance. So there are certainly metrics that we wish we had our hands on. You mentioned about the VA scandal that we would have loved to incorporate, but from the data that we were able to get our hands on, this is complete. However, you're bringing up an excellent point, which is at the end of the day, we need to make a decision about how do we weigh these metrics. For someone, weather may matter a lot. For someone else, whether they might not even care. The same thing with job opportunities, education opportunities, and so on. So the key takeaway that we want military retirees to take from this study is not necessarily the particular ranking, but the fact that there is a lot of differentiation between states on a lot of these different metrics, ranging from how many homeless veterans each state has to how they tax military pension. And they should use this data to make an informed decision about where they settle after service, rather than just going where their buddies went a couple of years ago or anything of that nature.
But Odysseas, you wouldn't denigrate the fact that comrades in arms were there side by side in the military. It's understandable they might want to stay together in the retirement phase of life.
Absolutely, and that's why we looked at veterans per capita as one of those metrics. We also looked at the percentage of the population that is over 40 years old. That's around the age that most military people retire around, because you would want people around your age group to be surrounded. So we definitely looked at those metrics, but my point is, again, you decide how to weigh these metrics and how important they are to you based on looking at hard data rather than anecdotal evidence.
So Odysseas, I'm curious to know what you would recommend to some of the states that ranked among the worst, like JD's beloved Arizona. What can they do to improve, and what would you tell them to do?
I think that military people bring to a lot to the table, from skill set, from work ethic, from loyalty. And so what I would encourage is a lot of the states toward the bottom of the list really lack in terms of providing veteran job opportunities for veterans, but also helping veterans start their own businesses. And so I would really encourage them to look at that, and also look at healthcare, specifically for veterans, and what they can do, because especially coming out of two wars, that's an important aspect as well that those states will have to consider in order to attract veterans in their states.
Odysseas, we just have to point out, while you were answering Morgan's question, and Morgan brought up my beloved Arizona, we were showing footage from New York, from Central Park, with the snow very deep. Now, there may be snow in northern Arizona, but not there on the desert floor. But again, there are so many different factors, and again, you're stressing that most military retirees are still relatively young people in their early to mid-40s. And so there are opportunities they have to avail themselves of in terms of business startups or future employment. But I do have to tell you, Odysseas, you never cease to surprise us. They're fine folks in Wyoming, but I didn't expect Wyoming to be #1 on your list.
Didn't expect it either, but they have, in terms of the number of veterans, for example, they have 10 times more VA health facilities than Virginia has, which Virginia has more veterans than on a per capita base again than any other state. So I don't know how they got that.
Well, you guys ran it through, and that's what we appreciate about WalletHub.com. Odysseas Papadimitriou, we thank you for your insights. We look forward to another visit real soon because we know you'll have some more rankings that will surprise us quite a bit.
I can tell you Wyoming has gorgeous sunsets.
Oh,
and great
absolutely.
skiing.
It's a great place. Can't complain. Thanks again to Odysseas. Well, now, you know, Odysseas brought up weather. There are a lot of different factors, but with Memorial Day right about here, what about the best place for military retirees? If you were in the military, where did you end up hanging your hat? Why don't you email us your comments at Newsmax TV, #America's Forum. There's also email and Facebook. And America's Forum continues after this time out.